So now moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Bradley Jersak. Dr. Jersak is the Dean of Theology and Culture at St. Stephen's University, New Brunswick, Canada, and Professor of Religious Studies and for the Institute for Religion, Peace and Justice. He is also a monastery preacher at All Saints of North America Orthodox Monastery in Canada. Can I welcome Dr. Jersak to speak to us now? Thank you very much.
I would like to share what I'm calling drinking well from others' wells, reading sacred texts for invitations. Your Excellencies, sisters and brothers in God's expansive family, grace and peace. As a Canadian subject of Her Majesty, I sorrow with my friends across the Commonwealth, with gratitude that God answered our prayers, that she would live long and reign well. Today, I'd like to express my gratitude for our common commitment to peacemaking and to share 4 brief invitations about reading one another's texts with openness, respect, and wonder. I was personally raised in a tradition of religious certitude, where we were all too convinced that our provincial faith and our particular way of reading our scriptures defined the sealed boundaries of truth. Regardless of whether what I share in this paper resonates with others, I sincerely hope that you will hear my good faith repentance for the narrowness that I'm still overcoming. In my attempts to drink well from the wells of other holy books, I've developed 4 invitations that I'll briefly clarify and illustrate. My sense is that reading well includes the following. 1, that I would invite us to read well from each other's scriptures with open hearts, attentive to points of connection. And this is the particular genius of my friend Safi. 2, I invite us to read well from other scriptures, seeing them as a unique song to the one true God. And I invite us, 3rd, to consider how others read their own scriptures. And finally, I invite us to consider how others read our scriptures. So the first point, I invite us to read well from each other's scriptures with open hearts, attentive to points of connection. Of course, this is first of all an invitation to read one another's scriptures. Many people of faith have neglected to read their own texts, much less those of other faiths. And perhaps we were taught to be afraid to read outside our tradition, or worse, we presumed only to read other holy books, scouring them for ammunition to use against them. I've seen that. I've experienced that even this week. I believe we're invited to do better, reading the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures with open hearts, attentive to those connecting dots. And in the Christian text, the Acts of the Apostles, Paul of Tarsus finds himself addressing Stoic philosophers at the Parthenon in Athens, amidst even their idols, and seeking to make his message heard, he came prepared. He wanted to establish some solid common ground with his pagan audience. And he says, quote, as one of your own poets said, and elsewhere he says, as one of your own prophets said elsewhere. And then he actually cites 2 different hymns to Zeus that they were familiar with. Imagine that. Now, Paul did not see their prophets as his prophets. He did not regard their vision of Zeus as his god at all. But crucially, he read them with an open heart, attentive to those points of connection, so that from their sacred texts, Paul could affirm what any of us here could probably agree to, and that is this, that we are all God's offspring, children of one and the same creator, and 2, that in him we all live and move and have our being. He found these statements, which became central to Christian theology, in a pagan text because he was looking to do some peacemaking, to be someone who would invite conversation and who could hear one another well. Who knew that Paul would make part of his central confession, derive it from a pagan mythological song? Similarly, not every Jew would recognize Jesus of Nazareth as one of their prophets. Not every Christian recognizes Muhammad, peace be unto him, as one of our prophets. And not every Muslim would recognize someone like Paul of Tarsus outside of the Gospels as one of their prophets. But like Paul, could we not read each other's prophets through the scriptures, attentive to the points of connection? 2, I invite us to read each other's scriptures well, seeing them as unique songs to the one true God. So once we become willing to read each other's scriptures, we'll of course also notice not only common points, but points of divergence. In fact, even within my own scriptures, I see a polyphonic message that while it's harmonious, it's certainly not sung in unison, but rather than seeing our diversity as a point of conflict or a cause for exclusion, might we instead think of our holy books at the very least as each other's faith's unique song about the one true God? Perhaps then we could acknowledge the following points. No, other's sacred song is not necessarily my song. Other's sacred song is not necessarily how I would sing about God. But I can read and honor any sacred song sung to the one universal creator God, as it spurs me to a deeper devotion, a more rigorous obedience, and a more open-hearted love that erases barriers of hostility that divide us. Truth be told, I was moved to find this concept, worshiping the one true creator God across multiple faiths amid diverse songs of devotion by a diverse choir of prophetic songbirds, where? In the Sikh scriptures of all places. As a Christian peacemaker living in a city that is 35% Sikh, is it not my responsibility to know their sacred song and rejoice in its many points of resonance? As a Christian worshiper, I can say, as one of their prophets says, the compassionate Lord is merciful to the meek. The ocean of peace, he fills all hearts. He sees and hears and is always with me. He's the creator, the cause of causes, the cherisher of the world. And they sing, merciful to the meek, O my beloved ocean of peace. As a Christian worshiper, I'm inspired to pray from the Jewish Psalter. He made his ways known to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. As far as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. As a Christian worshiper, I'm inspired to pray from the Quran. In the name of God, the merciful to all, the mercy giver, praise be to God, the Lord of the world, the merciful to all, the mercy giver, master of the day of judgment. As a Christian worshiper, I'm inspired by those prayers to excel in my faith because of yours. Third, I invite us to consider how others read their own scriptures. Reading others' scriptures well means noting how each faith tradition interprets their own holy books. It's not fair to impose my interpretive biases on your texts without reference to how each source tradition hears and prays and lives them themselves. Before anti-Semitism so badly infected the church, early Christians patterned their approach to the Torah after the Jewish rabbi Philo of Alexandria. Philo summoned Torah readers to interpret their text in a manner, quote, worthy of God. Before even opening the scrolls, he insisted on the premise that God is good, and he warned against literalist readings that would blaspheme God's character. Ironically, Christians often assume that Jewish rabbis read the Torah as rigid religious literalists and legalists and moralists, while somehow Christianity had arrived at the true spirit of the law. My experience is actually just the opposite. Christian readings of the Jewish scriptures often suffer from a neglect of consulting ancient and contemporary rabbis for their layered and nuanced discoveries. I recall puzzling over the Jewish tradition of Abraham's test of faith in the binding of Isaac. Christians commonly appropriated the imagery of the ram identifying it with the Protestant doctrine of substitutionary atonement. But is that the true meaning of the Isaac incident? I had my doubts, and I wondered how Jewish scholars read their own story. And this is my point. How do you read your text? I need to know. So listening to a BBC radio skeptic interviewing Chief Rabbi Sir Jonathan Sacks a number of years back, it was very instructive. So the skeptic, John Humphreys, he says, "Why would a merciful God have done to Abraham what he did to Abraham, faced him with the agonizing dilemma, sacrifice your child if you believe me? Why would God have faced a human being with that wicked choice?" And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks responded, "We know that child sacrifice was incredibly widespread in the ancient world. We know that from every kind of archaeological evidence, child sacrifice, which is referred to many times in the Hebrew Bible as the most abominable of all acts, was the kind of thing you expected a God to ask of you. It's what the gods regularly asked from their devotees. But the essence of the Abraham story is that at the critical moment, God says, stop. I'm not that kind of God. He was teaching them, I did that so you would learn exactly what would happen if you don't listen carefully. So God slammed them on the brakes, and it was the most effective way of all history. End quote. Rabbi Sacks' response resonates with me, partly because I find it satisfying, but also because it makes more sense for me to wade into the Jewish scriptures with a Jewish guide. I invite us all to read well by learning how each faith tradition reads, prays, and lives from its own holy books. Finally, and fourth, I invite us to hear how other faiths read our scriptures. Finally, I call us to look for the gifts amidst their insights. In other words, we're hearing how other people read our books to see what they're seeing that I've sort of become dull to. And so it's one of my great joys to team teach on the Beatitudes of Jesus with my dear friend Safi Kaskas. Many of our students at the Institute for Religion, Peace, and Justice had never actually previously ever met a Muslim. And so when Safi joins us for a lecture and he opens up our own Sermon on the Mount to us, they're delighted when he shares insightful parallels between the Gospels and the Quran. So, for example, citing the 7th Beatitude, Safi says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." This is really his refrain, isn't it? "For they will be called children of God." And this is a mind bender for our students. Are we saying that Muslims can be children of God too? Well, if they're peacemakers, they are, according to Jesus. So peacemakers, and so Safi says this, peacemakers are those special individuals who care enough to strive for peace. Among our Christian brothers and sisters, the primary conflict they will think about is what they call the alienation of human beings from God, and they consider that Jesus' main mission was to reconcile us back to God. A true understanding of Jesus' teachings will turn each Jesus follower into a peacemaker. Then he continues, Muslims see the main conflict as one of submitting and seeking harmony with God's will. Islam's religious text, the Quran, references the importance of peaceful living and coexistence for the entire human community. Islam's religious text, the Quran, references the importance of peaceful living and coexistence with the entire human community. That's worth repeating. This is why we're here today. And then in my class, he will then share a passage from the Quran to our Christian students to help us see the commonalities. And one that he loves to share is this from the Quran 5:15 and 16. Enlightenment has now come to you from God, and a clear book. Through it, God guides those who follow what pleases him to the ways of peace. The ways of peace. And so I'm grateful for Safi. I'm grateful for you all. I'm grateful for your insights into the gospel teachings of Jesus, where you've looked at them, and the parallels within your holy books. I'm grateful for Safi's example as a peacemaker in initiating this meeting, and his hospitality to me and to the rest of us has really begun transforming us from strangers into brothers and sisters. And so to all of you, people of God, I'm humbled that you allowed me to share my perspective today, and I'm gratified to participate in your generous peacemaking work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I hope you don't mind calling you Brad. I know your friends call you Brad, so I feel like I know you that much better. And I think, listening to you was, again, yet, more inspiration and more connections being made. And I hope Matt Harp, who's listening in, won't mind me sharing something he's posted, which is, "Your faith inspires me to excel in mine." Well, I think that deeply resonates, as do some of the other things that you've touched upon. And forgive me, I am just picking out a few points here. There was so much depth and meaning to everything you said, but I think particularly your quote, "drinking well from the wells of others' holy books." I think that's so important, and really the heart of this, I think, conversation. But it reminds me of my childhood, and when I was going to mosque as a young person, very, very long time ago. But I remember not being encouraged to read other texts. And I think that was, again, perhaps lack of understanding, perhaps fear, perhaps holding on to one's culture and traditions in a new world, because my family moved to England and was setting up. So, there were some real reasons. But having said that, I think, key things that you've mentioned, words such as connections, sharing commonalities, reading with open hearts, divergence, diversity. I think those are really the essential words and concepts that we need to delve into. And I'm hoping that we'll hear more from those perspectives and others as we go through the conference. So thank you very, very much for that.